Today, we're going to return to a topic we've been covering quite a lot on Anticonquista. We're going to be talking about Venezuela. It's a topic that we're going to continue to cover because there's so much anti-Venezuela propaganda out there every day, nonstop, 24/7. Propaganda that seeks to blame President Nicolás Maduro and the United Socialist Party of Venezuela for all of the problems that are going on in the country. Today, the video we're going to take a look at is Inside Venezuela's Crisis, Blocked Aid, Tear Gas, and Richard Branson by the New York Times. The video attempts to explain what happened on Saturday, February 23rd. It was all over the headlines. On Saturday, February 23rd, 2019, there was a big clash on the border between Cúcuta, Colombia, and Ureña, Venezuela. But once you stop and listen carefully to the report that we're about to hear from the New York Times, the dispatches, you can hear how imperialist propaganda is embedded within the whole report. And it's important because you can bet that in coming weeks, people are going to turn to bourgeois outlets like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, etc., for sources in order to push more economic sanctions, push more diplomatic maneuvers against Venezuela to continue the stranglehold on the Bolivarian Revolution. And so it's important that we go back to reports on what actually happened on that day to debunk them, to see what's really going on. Let's see what the New York Times had to say about the recent clash along the Venezuelan-Colombian border.
Venezuelan protesters throw rocks at forces loyal to President Nicolás Maduro. We're on the Colombian side of the border with Venezuela. We came here to see if the fight to push across US aid will break Maduro's hold on power.
He says, we came here to see if the fight to push across US aid will break Maduro's hold on power. First of all, the aid was very suspicious from the beginning. And just that phrase alone, to break Maduro's hold on power, implies that he's some sort of dictator. Maduro won the 2018 presidential election with the majority of votes. He is the legitimate democratically elected president of Venezuela. So this phrase, hold on to power, and isolating it to Maduro already shows you the political nature of this report, which is supposedly objective, which is supposedly free of bias.
But so far, the confrontation has led to this: tear gas, hundreds of injuries, and the trucks with the aid eventually turning back. It was a very different scene along the border the day before. This bridge has been barricaded by Maduro to keep out donated food and medical supplies, which he sees as a ploy to undermine his government.
It's insane to think that the US is ever going to bring humanitarian aid to any country. The US never saves countries around the world. The United States only destroys countries around the world. The New York Times reporter says the bridge has been barricaded by Maduro, not the people of Venezuela, not the Venezuelan National Guard, but Maduro himself, as if he actually went out there and created the barricade himself, to keep donated food and medical supplies, which he sees as a ploy to undermine his government. And again, they use the word which he sees, and not stating it as an objective truth that this is a ploy to undermine his government. And you see the play on words here. They're saying barricaded by Maduro. They're only focusing on Maduro. They're only focusing on the president. They're not attributing it to the Venezuelan people. They're not saying the Venezuelan people are barricading their own lands to protect their country from foreign invasion. They're saying Maduro. And they're saying to keep out donated food and medical supplies. Donated. When we hear the word donated, we think of some nice grassroots community effort. We're talking about the United States of America, the world hegemon, the largest imperialist power in the world, which is using these foods and medical supplies as bait, as a Trojan horse to enter the country.
On this day, the bridge turned into the stage for a star-studded concert. Energizing Venezuelans with pop music and rallying support for the opposition.
He talks about the concert. So on Friday, the day before, Friday, January 22nd, there were two concerts held, one on the side of Colombia, one on the side of Venezuela. And obviously, the one that was held in Colombia was organized by the Venezuelan opposition, the U.S., and all of their lackeys. And I just find it hilarious that the music that they played in the opposition concert was all this trash with these artists who are all backed by commercial interests and brands. And then you have the concert in Venezuela where most of the music being played was from an artist named Ali Primera, who's a revolutionary socialist Venezuelan activist from the 70s and the 80s who created very beautiful music about serving the people, liberating the country from imperialism. And even just the nature of the music that's being played at these two concerts, one by one, comparing them is very different. And even from that, you see the class nature. At this concert, you see a bunch of white people. It looks like Izu or some shit like that. If you're from the US, you know what I'm talking about. These Electric Daisy Carnival and Izu and Coachella, these pop commercial concerts where they glorify individualism and capitalism. This is what the Venezuelan opposition concert looks like. Meanwhile, the Chavista concert is celebrating socialism, the people, women, the barrios, the community. So the class nature of the concerts are very different.
At times it felt removed from the reality inside Venezuela, and we wondered if a show like this could really play any part in bringing political change. We spoke with billionaire Richard Branson, one of the event's organizers.
We filmed from up here. We're both in sweaty t-shirts.
We're going to have a wonderful concert today. Hopefully it'll be a dawn of a new era.
Do you believe that? I mean, do you believe that it can be achieved?
I'm really hopeful. I think anybody who's in a position to help should help.
Is this just a media spectacle?
Go and talk to the people in the audience who are predominantly Venezuelans, and you'll realize that it's anything but that.
So in that clip, we hear from Richard Branson, who is a British billionaire, the owner of Virgin, the brand. I think he owns Virgin Airlines and Virgin Mobile, a billionaire from the UK, saying, go and talk to the people in the audience who are predominantly Venezuelans, and you'll recognize it's anything but a media spectacle. He's appealing to the same argument that's made constantly by the Venezuelan opposition and supporters of the opposition who say that you have to trust everything a Venezuelan says about the country, which is absolutely false. If you ask white right-wing Cubans from Miami what they think about Cuba, obviously they're going to give you a biased response. If you ask white South Africans who fled South Africa after apartheid what they think about South Africa, they're going to give you a biased response. If you ask white people in India who were living there under colonialism what they thought about independence, obviously their response is going to be biased. And so we have to keep that in mind with Venezuela.
Todos se unieron en una sola voz. Todo el mundo, todo el planeta están todos concentrados en esta frontera para que la abran y pueda pasar toda esa ayuda humanitaria.
Es como un escape para muchos venezolanos. Estamos en una realidad paralela aquí.
So one of the concert goers, a white Venezuelan woman who seems pretty well off. It doesn't seem like she's experiencing any major poverty, says it's like an escape for many Venezuelans. We're in a parallel reality here. It's so sad because according to a study by La Opinión, which is a local Colombian media outlet, more than 50% of the people in the state, in the land where they're standing on, Norte Santander, which is the department where they're at in Cucuta, more than 50% of the people there live below the poverty line. So she's acting like it's some capitalist paradise where they're free to drink Coca-Cola and eat McDonald's and enjoy all of the fruits of capitalism, when people on the very land that they're standing on are dying of hunger and thirst and malnutrition under a capitalist economic system, but no attention is given to that. So that's just sad that she's saying it's like an escape for her and a parallel reality. Look at the reality around you. Look at the poverty around you, the capitalist poverty around you.
Creo que mañana pase nada diferente.
They're playing Imagine by John Lennon as if they're some sort of revolutionary group promoting peace, which is hilarious, would be hilarious if it weren't such a serious situation. John Lennon, I disagree with a lot of his political views. He was just a liberal, reactionary musician. But people look at the track Imagine and they try to equate it with anti-war, with the anti-war movement. Obviously, I'm anti-war, I'm anti-imperialist, so is anti-conquista. But to try to give the Venezuelan opposition some sort of progressive branding, some sort of anti-war branding with the song Imagine by John Lennon is very deceptive. And a little earlier during the concert, one of the performers had a shirt that I think is also connected to John Lennon and his branding that said "War is over," which is ironic that they were wearing that at a concert funded by the US, the National Endowment for Democracy, which has promoted war all over the world. They're wearing anti-war shirts and playing anti-war music at a concert that's backed by the biggest warmonger in the world, the United States, at a concert that's intended to promote war against Venezuela. So take a look at all of those optics. This is how they frame the Venezuelan opposition as some sort of progressive, hip, young, peace-loving democratic movement by putting songs like Imagine, by putting shirts that say war is over on performers at this concert. They're able to convince people that the warmongers are peace lovers and that the peace lovers are warmongers.
It's the day that the opposition will try to force the aid across the border. And we're back where the concert ended hours before. Juan Guaidó, the leader of the opposition, arrives. He's been recognized as Venezuela's president by more than 50 countries, including the United States.
Most of the countries that have recognized Guaidó are all in Europe, the vast majority. There are some right-wing Latin American countries that recognized him under duress by the United States, the Organization of American States. But the vast majority of the world recognizes Maduro, most of Africa, most of Asia, and Latin America. And keep that in mind when they're saying that more than 50 countries recognize Guaidó. You know, they're all European, North American countries, and they're right-wing proxies in the region and Latin America that are recognizing him, not for some sort of humanitarian democratic reason, but because his interests of privatization and capitalism fall in line with their interests.
Everyone on the bridge is watching to see what will happen when Guaidó tries to lead the trucks carrying across the aid. But the border is sealed. On the other side, the Venezuelan armed forces, essential to Maduro's power, do not budge.
The Venezuelan armed forces, essential to Maduro's power, do not budge. That's a very politically loaded line. The Venezuelan armed forces have existed before Maduro and they'll exist after Maduro. They're not his personal group of henchmen, as what Western mainstream media like to portray it. The Venezuelan armed forces are defending their country. And again, as I mentioned earlier, they're isolating Maduro from the Venezuelan people. They don't say the Venezuelan armed forces essential to Venezuela's sovereignty. They say no, Venezuelan armed forces essential to Maduro's power. The fact that they use power and Maduro already in your mind creates this optic of this paranoid dictator grabbing for power instead of the Venezuelan people defending their homeland.
And Guaido's hope that they would step aside to let the aid through is dashed. Guaido and the trucks never make it onto the bridge. Nor do these Venezuelans. Colombian police keep them back to prevent clashes.
Aquí está este pueblo, Señor. Mira tus hijos que claman con piedad.
But on other bridges, violence does break out. We tag along with Omar Lares, a former mayor living in exile for opposing Maduro's government. We see one of the trucks with aid burning after protesters clash with Venezuelan security forces.
So this was one of the aspects of the clashes on Saturday, February 23rd, that got some of the most attention from mainstream media, which is the burning of the truck carrying the so-called humanitarian aid for Venezuela. The truck, as has been claimed by mainstream media, was burned by the National Guard of Venezuela. Now, keep this in mind. The National Guard of Venezuela does not have any devices, do not carry any devices that are explosive. They carry rubber bullets and they carry tear gas canisters. That's it. They have rubber bullets and tear gas canisters. They don't have Molotov cocktails. They don't have grenades. They don't have, shotguns or automatic rifles. They have tear gas canisters and rubber bullets. How can those two weapons in any way blow up a truck? Now, video has surfaced online showing that the truck carrying the aid was in fact burned by the Venezuelan opposition itself. Protesters threw Molotov cocktails at the truck in an attempt to make it seem like it was destroyed by the armed forces of Venezuela. This is, again, another deceptive move by the media to not attribute the burning of the truck to the opposition and instead either blame it on the government or just not attribute who actually burned the truck in general. They move the responsibility of burning the truck away from the opposition protesters toward the Venezuelan government. Let's take a look at the video of the opposition protesters burning the truck. So as you can see from the video, it's obvious that it wasn't the Venezuelan armed National Guard that blew up the truck. It was the opposition in an attempt to blame it on the government.
At the end of the day, a couple of dozen soldiers had defected, but Maduro survived the challenge. Guaido is outside his country, and it's unclear when he'll be able to return.
Vamos a esperar instrucciones del presidente Guaidó, como le dije. Esperemos a ver.
Now, the stage is set for what could become a bloodier conflict as Venezuela's presidents dig in their heels.
The last line of the video, he says, the stage is set for what could become a bloodier conflict as Venezuela's presidents, in plural, dig in their heels. as Venezuela's presidents dig in their heels. Why is that significant? That's significant because he's already assuming that the New York Times, that is, and the reporter, that Maduro and Guaido both are equally disputable as the president. Maduro is the president. He was elected democratically in May 2018 as the president of Venezuela. He is the president, not Guaido. Guaido is not the president. He's just some random dude who on January 23rd declared himself the president of the country. So now by the New York Times putting Maduro and Guaido on equal footing, describing them as Venezuela's presidents in plural, they're completely erasing the elections that Venezuela had. They're completely erasing the fact that the people voted for Maduro as their president and not Guaido. And that's very dangerous because then when you erase all of that context, that background, it's easier for people to walk away thinking that, it's just a toss-up between these two guys who are equally fighting for the same spot. No, Maduro's the president. Guaido is the one who's trying to act like he's the president, but he's not. So again, that's very deceptive language from the New York Times by using the plural presidents. That's very deceptive on their side. This is what imperialist propaganda looks like. It's very subtle. It's not always the Fox News style intimidating, MS-13 is on our border and, Hezbollah in Venezuela is promoting terrorism. Yes, that's one form of imperialist propaganda. But New York Times, as the liberal beacon of bourgeois media, has very subtle methods of promoting their imperialist goals. And this is just one of them, by using language, carefully crafted language, in ways that decontextualize the situation. So that being said, let me quickly tell you what actually happened on Saturday, February 23rd. Several weeks ago, Venezuela's right-wing opposition, as I mentioned, announced that they would forcibly attempt to bring so-called U.S. aid into the country. Caracas denounced the move as a precursor for U.S.-led military invasion into the country and proceeded to close its borders with Colombia, Brazil, and a few other Caribbean islands. This made sense given that similar aid schemes were tried and used successfully, unfortunately, in Iraq and Libya, where the U.S. bombed and invaded those countries in 2003 and 2011. So it's not like the people of Venezuela are unaware of this strategy. They've seen this strategy unfold in other countries, especially in the Middle East, and they're not going to let the U.S. come and do that to their country. It was clear overall that the aid was nothing more than a Trojan horse for invasion. Now, on Saturday, a day after the Venezuela Live Aid concert held in Cúcuta, Colombia, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans, Chavistas, participated in an anti-imperialist march in Caracas and other marches in border towns along the Colombian border. International support from U.S.-aligned governments was also prominent on the border where the opposition was, with Colombian President Iván Duque and Chilean President Sebastián Piñera both present at the opposition rallies. So this is a broader regional initiative by the opposition to attack the democratically elected Venezuelan government. Trump and Hillary Clinton, mind you, also backed Guaido's efforts via Twitter to bring in the humanitarian aid, so-called humanitarian aid, through the truck. Also on Saturday, opposition supporters initiated violence against the Venezuelan National Guard, which set up barricades in advance on the Simón Bolívar Bridge connecting the two countries. And as I mentioned, the opposition threw the Molotov cocktails. They started the conflict. They threw rocks, they threw Molotov cocktails, and they also had the backing of the Colombian police, who did nothing to stop the opposition protesters. They let it happen. They started it. And one of the trucks carrying the so-called U.S. aid, as I mentioned, was purposefully lit on fire by the opposition protesters themselves in order to blame the National Guard. After a few more skirmishes, the opposition retreated. They realized that their efforts would not be fruitful, and they pulled away. Guaidó has since left Venezuela. He's in Colombia. It's reported that he's in Colombia. And who knows what's going to happen next? Honestly, I think this was a huge victory for Maduro, for the Chavistas, for Venezuela, because they showed that the fascists will not pass. The fascists backed by the U.S., the Venezuelan opposition, they don't have popular support among the masses in Venezuela. The people of Venezuela don't want to be invaded. And February 23rd, on Saturday, with this border clash, demonstrated that. Now, after this whole controversy, they're already attempting to place all of the blame on the government, and they're taking the struggle back into the diplomatic arena, including the United Nations. So in coming days and weeks, you'll definitely be seeing a lot of media reports about international organizations like the UN and others trying to pressure Venezuela based on events on this day, Saturday, February 23rd. And that's why I felt it was important to break down what happened on that day, what actually happened, because they're going to be using videos like this as forms of evidence, so-called evidence against Venezuela. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching. This was episode 7 of Decolonizing Media on Anticonquista. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and IG at Anticonquista, youtube.com/Anticonquista. Subscribe to us there. And you can listen to audio versions of this video podcast on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Anticonquista. Thanks for following and listening to us. Hope you have a great week.